All right, so we're going to get started, and as people come in, they'll have to just kind of get in where they fit in. All right, so I guess everybody's seen these kind of memes throughout Facebook, the internet, through text. Everybody's doing their thing. Everything but probably this one, probably don't do. That's where all this is headed. So you should be doing that probably less than every 10 years. But the idea, how many people actually understand the settlement and how to move forward and all that kind of stuff? They've got a really good, clear understanding of what's going on and what to do. Handful? All right. Well, I've been listening to and reading a lot, doing a lot of research, looking at the DOJ stuff, and there's 3 different versions of this. There's the old way, there's the new way that's allowed, and there's the DOJ way, that's really where it's headed. And I'll go into detail on this in a little bit. But we need to, I think, the main part of this, I want to get, and other people from other offices too, make sure that when you're doing deals, from now on, the other side may not have a clear understanding of what's going on, and from their broker, it could even be more misinformation. So, and you know how some people get when my broker told me this, we've got to get this signed, this is required, blah, 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 blah. Just give the other side grace, whoever it is. Doesn't matter how ignorant they are to what's going on, and you may know more. Just the idea is trying to keep the transaction on the rails. Just give the other side a little more grace over the next probably 6 to 12 months, because that's ultimately what's going to need to happen. And as we go forward, more changes will happen, and more forms will come out, and more amendments, and all this kind of stuff. And everybody's going to have their own versions of what they can, can't do, or what they should or shouldn't do. So that was kind of the reasoning behind this. It's a 4-part series. And let me go ahead and, here we go. Before I start getting into my slides. Okay, so we've got 4 dates. Today's, of course, the 7th. This is a 4-part series. And it's on the 4 Wednesdays. We have a few speakers as well. And today is about, of course, the changes themselves, have a clear understanding, and also talk about the new forms and relatively how to use the new forms. Now, let me go back one. The 14th, we're going to be playing out scenarios, a little maybe more role play, and specific language put in your contracts, maybe doing different buyer agent forms, maybe different topics, different things like that, but basically going in a deep dive on, it's like a part 2 to what we're doing today. Today is more of an overview with some nuances on really a clear understanding on how to move forward. And then the second day on the 14th, we're going to go more deep dive in specific scenarios. Let's say that you own the property and you're dealing with a customer, or now you're dealing with a home builder or a FSBO, something like that. What forms to use, what language, what is putting yourself or your broker or brokerage at risk to as far as liability. Does that make sense? So next week is probably going to be more important than this week, but today is more important because it gives you more of a foundation to build on, if that makes sense. So, and at the end, Texana, Amy and Jennifer are going to be putting a presentation for a new REMLO program. A lot of people don't understand this, but you can play loan officer and real estate agent at the same time. That changed about 18 months ago. And we're partnering up with Texana Bank to kind of roll that out and what that looks like, and give you the nuances on that. All right.
Is that more for flip, Justin, or for
anything? Yeah, any buyer. So focus is paramount. Please mute your cell phones, turn them off, those kind of things. I'm not going to fine anybody. You're just going to be shamed. That's all. And if you're an eAgent, you can join the Facebook group based on the Top Producer Academy that we have. I was like, that's a weird cell phone. And then I realized what it was. But you can scan that QR code to join the Top Producer Academy Facebook group for eAgents. If you want the slides or anything else over the next 4 days and you're outside of eAgent, just text me or email me and I'll be able to give you the information, just a different access. That's why I keep having to put this slide in, because I forget to introduce myself. I'm Justin Allen. For those that don't know me, I'm the CEO of eAgent. My wife and I founded the company as a franchisor back in 2019. And I'm also, with my wife, Darlene, owner of eAgent Nexus, which is one of the franchises in Ocean Springs on Washington Avenue. A lot of people think that I bought into eAgent somehow, or it's part of a bigger thing and I'm just a local guy, part of a bigger, but it's not. We own it outright, and it's the full, we own eAgent.com, everything to do with eAgent. So if you see that anywhere, that has to do with us. Our purpose, I keep having to put these in because I want to make sure that everybody understands what we do is, let me look this way, to empower entrepreneurs with opportunities and tools to enrich their lives. That's our purpose for eAgent. And the reason why we don't say agents, we say entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs make it happen, and some agents let it happen. So we are more about providing opportunities and tools for entrepreneurs, the ones that want to have more ambition and more go the distance, kind of make things happen, and we want to elevate those opportunities for those individuals. Our mission is to become the #1 difference maker in the industry. So how do you do that? You try to make a difference with the franchisees and the agents, and then that trickles down to the clients and transactions themselves. And then our goal, even though this is lofty, is to capture 51% of the market share within each region that we operate in as a collective, not as a brokerage, not as an agent, not as a team, just as a collective of the eAgent brand ourselves. So, remember this? Remember when we're all talking about interest rates? Like it was a big deal, several months ago, maybe less than a year ago. Now all of a sudden, I hadn't talked about interest rates in a long time, right? But it seems like that's the main thing that the public is speaking about. This is one thing I really have enjoyed or looking forward to in the next several months between now and November, the actual settlement, because this is kind of a proposed settlement now, and it'll be hopefully locked down and moved forward after November. Between now and November, we have other things in the news to talk about, so hopefully all the spotlight will be put on the NAR settlement and all the BS that goes along with that, and it'll be put on politics instead. So hopefully we won't be in the limelight, as I once thought we would be. Anybody talking about mortgage rates? Anybody hear anything from their buyers? You're talking to buyers or sellers. What's the temperature out there? What are people saying? Are they asking you about the NAR settlement? How many have gotten feedback from sellers or buyers or asking hey, I want to go list your house and I heard that I don't have to pay a buyer's agent anymore? A few?
I've had one buyer recently that actually, she was pretty knowledgeable about it. I was impressed. Which it helped me because she led me right into the whole thing that I needed to say. So she was coming from Colorado. Now, nobody around here is mentioning anything.
Yeah. Colorado's a different breed. They're pushing back actually on the buyer's rep agreements being signed before tours. That's a big problem that they're seeing, and they're pushing back against that part of it as a state, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah. Anybody else hearing anything different specifically from buyers or sellers or what they're saying?
Also, transaction right.
Out of state?
I'm in a transaction right now where in the MLS, the listing agent put 0% buyer agency compensation, include your compensation rate in the offer.
Yeah.
So I was going over with the buyer, and he literally said, I don't care, it doesn't matter to me. He said, if he doesn't pay you, I'll pay whatever, it's whatever. That was his response.
And they have the means to, apparently.
That's the big thing.
Yeah, having the means to, right? So we'll get into a lot of that too. All right, so what is a top producer? This is a Top Producer Academy. How would you define a top producer in your office, in your mind? What does that look like? Is it production? Is it volume? Is it somebody with a good reputation? What is that? What do you think? Because I think everybody feels a top producer is a little bit all over the map, right? So what do you think a top producer is? Anybody got any idea? Defines?
I just feel like somebody that works their butt off
Works their butt off?
and gets their accomplishments.
That's somebody from Top Producer of the Year last year. Most amount of transactions of all eAgent offices last year. She would know. Works their butt off. Okay.
I say reputation and knowledge.
Reputation and knowledge. I think reputation has a lot to do with it.
You want and still don't have a
be a top producer. Still.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that, and you know them, we're probably all thinking of the same handful, that do a lot of transactions, but you don't want to do transactions with them, right? Kind of a turn and burn method. So anybody else? Anybody think? What do you think about volume or transactions? What do you think those transaction count would be or volume? Might throw out a number. What do you think that is? Transaction count or number, volume?
More than 12 a year?
More than 12 a year? I hope so.
40.
And it also depends on what kind of, like, yeah, like what kind of 12, like what are the 12 too? You know, it could be something different. Because I know, like on West Coast, if you're in Malibu and you do 12, you're probably doing a lot better than you think you are. Yeah. You know, so Ken's a top producer. What'd you do last year? You don't know? See, that's when you know they're top producers. They have no idea what they did. But I would say probably sometimes in some circles, maybe 18, maybe 24, maybe 36. You know, you're kind of getting into that elite field, right? But is it an 80-20 rule? Is it a 90-10 rule? It's probably one or the other, right? You see a vast majority of the people doing a lot of the transactions. I think around half of the agents in our MLS do one or less transactions a year. Half. And it's been that way for years. It's not a new thing. It's been that way for a long time, for several years. Sometimes it goes above 50, sometimes a little below 50, but generally it's around that half, mark.
What did Mr. Frager say the average agent in Mississippi does less than 4? Didn't he say?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
Out of how many? We got like 4,000.
Yeah. But when you think about it, I mean, the barrier to entry into this industry is very low.
Yeah.
And NAR kind of wants it that way because the more members, the more impact they have, the more dues they can work with, the more a lot of things happen, right? So it kind of dilutes what we do as an industry, but it also gives a lot of opportunity to those that maybe have not had that opportunity either. So, you've got a lot of people. I didn't graduate college. I had enough.
Graduate high school.
Yeah. Does it matter? No. I had enough, hours to graduate. I just couldn't put it in a certain topic, right? I was like, all the little places said, screw it. I'm just going to be a dealer at a casino. Like, why am I still doing this? And I was going to make 60 grand somewhere else. And this was 2 decades ago, which 60 grand back then was like, you were rich, Now it's like you're in poverty for 60,000. It's like, geez, I can't even make my mortgage statement, for that. So this academy is designed to instill top producer habits that result in top producer production. Whatever that production seems to be in your head, whatever you want to make it, whatever those opportunities look for you. It may be that you have certain needs or certain goals, and the top producer in your mind is 18 transactions. If you're doing 18, maybe you want to do 36. That's the idea. Is you try to define it, I guess, however it is in your office. What do you think a top producer is in your office? What do you think? What you would think? Not to call anybody out.
I think
in your office.
I think it's a good combination of a lot of things. Right? Production's going to be an important amount of transactions, but I mean, there's a lot of people that present themselves on Facebook that you would think they're a top producer.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's a combination of all those things. And to be honest, an office presence I think makes a big difference too in who's a top producer. People who kind of stand out at the office may not have the most transactions, but they're always doing stuff on Facebook, always showing up at the office, always out showing houses. I think that's a big part of it as well. So not just the volume. I mean, obviously the volume's important, but there's other things that go into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It all adds up. And there's people who will take, you said something about not going to college, and there's people who will go to all these extracurricular activities for real estate. They're going to,
got all the letters.
Going to GCAR classes, going to NAR classes, and they do 3 transactions. Right? And then there's people who don't do any of those things that are doing 40 transactions.
I used to have an agent in our office where she didn't feel like she was justified, I guess, in how she presented herself as an agent unless she had a PhD in real estate. And she was going for a PhD. And I was like,
She's not 8 anymore?
nope. That's why I said used to.
I think the designations meant something, but
They mean something to you.
Yeah, it depends on the person.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying too, like knowledge and experience goes a long way.
yeah, it shows that you take the time to do a lot of it. But like,
But I will say this, over the next,
what those things mean, though.
yeah, I will say over the next few years, I think those designations will probably have a little bit more impact because the buyers will be looking for agents that are more experienced. And how do you know that they're experienced from the outside looking in without meeting them? Right? You go to their website and they say, hey, I did this, I'm this, I did that, whatever, my niche is this. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's going to play a part later on. So I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but sellers look for agents, buyers look for homes.
That's right.
But in the future, buyers will look for agents as well. That's what it's traditionally been. So you need to make sure that whatever your website looks like, your profiles on social media, whatever else, it gives you authority, if that makes sense. And authority in the right way. Man, is there some wrong authority out there. I'm not going to get into that. We don't have the time. Anybody know Simon Sinek? So this is a quick 2-minute video, but I think it's really pertinent to today.
It really boils down to empathy. You know, there's this phrase that's thrown around so often that people fear change. No, they don't. People fear sudden change.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, you know, many of the people in your organization, you know, many of them have been doing the job the way they've always been doing it for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And now we're going to say, okay, it's going to be all different. The fear is not from the change. The fear is from the unfamiliarity. The fear is that I know how to do that really, really well, and I fear that I don't know how to do that, and I will feel insecure, I'll be off my game, I'll lose my credibility, and you just have to put yourself in their shoes. The fear is being humiliated, you know, I don't understand the jargon, it's all new, you know, it's a whole host of things. So empathy is king. Empathy is king, and not assuming that everybody knows. And people come along with new directions at different paces. We kind of assume it's like getting into shape. You know, everybody goes to the gym, but some people get into shape quicker than others. There's no rule, it's just how it works. And it's the same here. Some people come along lickety-split, and some people are just a little slower. The ones that are potentially destructive are the ones that are so afraid that they actually put up barriers and become obstreperous. They actually resist the change to the point where they're clinging onto the past so desperately that they may accidentally sabotage themselves. And those are the ones that we have to have difficult conversations with. We sit down and say, I need to have a difficult conversation with you. I get a sense that you're struggling because everything we're trying to do, all you do is say no. And I understand it's difficult. We got to talk about this because the company is going in this direction and I want you to be a part of this. But I am patient. And to have that conversation privately with empathy, that someone can come clean and say, I'm scared, because then you can hold their hand, you know? So I think empathy is actually the core to helping people manage change.
Make sense? Winston Churchill said, a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, and an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So that's what we're up against, right? A lot of change, a lot of difficult change moving forward. And like Simon Sinek said, you know, having that empathy for the other side, having that grace, give them that. And then also the brokers in the room, if you've got agents that don't fully understand what's going on, what's happening, what forms to use, all that kind of stuff, make sure that they understand, and also have an easy path to contact you and be open with you that they don't understand. And it's okay to not understand because there's a lot of moving parts to this. And then it's going to be constantly moving. It's going to be one of these moving targets where it's going to be constantly changing in the next probably 18 months or more. We don't know. Right? So there's going to be a lot of people that are not going to know what's going on. I was talking to Taylor before we got started, and she said, you know, they had a contract where the buyer's agent in their buyer agreement put 0 and thought they were going to get 3% from the seller.
Oh, gosh.
You see that being a problem? That's a major problem. But they didn't know. They didn't understand, right? So they just give the other side grace. And potentially, you know, it wouldn't be a bad idea is when you're asking the other side, did you fill out your buyer's agent agreement properly? You don't want to get to the end and then think or assume something at the end either. And then themselves be put in a difficult situation. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to just kind of make sure that the other side is more understandable and you're both on the same page to get the transaction to close and keep everything on the rails. So do you see change as an opportunity or a difficulty? Like what Simon Sinek says, it's going to be difficult to go, and to see the change, but I think a lot of times people see the one thing I do like about this, it's not change for this one brokerage or this group of agents. It's everybody across the board. This is forced change. Forced change. Everybody's playing by the same rules. You just got to know what the rules are. And that's what today, we're going to try to clarify and bring more clarity to, is making sure that everybody understands it in a way that makes sense, and then you can also articulate it to your clients and then possibly other agents in the transaction or in your office as well. So how do you take advantage of the change in the marketplace? Anybody figured that piece out yet? How are you going to leverage the change, these opportunities? Because it is an opportunity. How are you going to change the way you do business to where you're leveraging the changes as an opportunity and not be held back and it be a difficulty? You see it, not as a pessimist. I think everybody in this room is more open-minded. You wouldn't be here to learn more, right? So you're probably more optimistic than pessimistic, but how are you going to do it? How are you going to change? How are you going to shift things? How are you going to better articulate your value proposition to the seller or the buyer? Because I used to say that the only true agents in real estate are agents that work for builders, because those are the ones that actually understand sales. Tracy knows this. Other people that understand and working with a builder, because if they came into the model home and you didn't sell them a home, you didn't get paid. And they had to buy from you. A lot of times you had to buy from you then and there, like in that subdivision. So your biggest competition was selling the same model to another subdivision and another agent in your own brand. So those people actually did sales. And most agents, the only time you actually had to do sales was in the listing appointment. The rest of the time you were showing homes, you weren't selling homes. And really today, I think you can probably be more showing homes than you are selling homes as well. But now you're going to have to pick up the buy-side consultation as another sales pitch, if that makes sense. So you have to learn how to do that appropriately and not put yourself in more liability than you should be. So real quick, I'm going to kind of explain how this works. And before I forget too, if anybody needs to go outside and take a phone call, do so. Or if you need to go into the hall, but just make sure you close the door because it echoes and just makes the phone call louder in the hall than it is out here. So I like to kind of teach things more visually so people can remember visually. So if you see the market, well, not necessarily the market, but the industry, the economy, things happen, things change, things shift, and we do like this, right? Things change, right? And then things change again, and we change again, change again, change again, right? So where people make money in the opportunity are these, let me do it different. This is where the public comes in. This is how they change. They do this and they're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Oh my God, oh my God. Oh my God. This is how they change, right? And they catch up, right? It's like they're on a big cruise ship and it's hard to turn, right? Because they don't fully understand, and the early adopters get it quick. They make they make those turn on a dime and they understand the changes and they move forward really quickly. But where the change you can actually leverage is right here. In these moments where change happens and you're able to leverage the change, leverage the opportunity where nobody else is there. You're really the only ones really leveraging it. Does that make sense? Perfect example is when we had, I could say, the recession from the housing downturn, 08, 09, 2010. One of the things that I noticed, we had a lot of job loss, but the two things that really leveraged that was GulfCoastJobs.com, BetterGulfCoastJobs.com. Remember this? Commercials and everywhere, it was about jobs, right? They were able to leverage it. You have all like the little newspapers, bottled gas stations, jobs. That was a big deal back then. They were able to leverage that. This is another example that I think is more prudent to COVID. COVID was a big shift in the industry, the economy, those kind of things. And who made out like bandits with COVID? No, well, I mean a brand. I know you did. I know we did, as personally we did, right? But I'm saying as a brand, there it is. Zoom. And they shouldn't have. Zoom destroyed the leverage and the opportunity in that time, but they shouldn't have because Skype had been there for over a decade.
Right.
Remember Skype?
Yeah.
How in the hell did they miss this opportunity? They weren't able to leverage. They didn't leverage the ability. And we could have been saying we Skype it instead of Zoom it.
Wow.
And they were way late, but they were able to leverage the opportunity and better position themselves in the marketplace. Does that make sense? Don't be Skype, be Zoom. Right? Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions, comments so far? I don't have the glazed look over just yet. We'll get that later in the evening, or the evening. Did I think you were going to be here till 6? No. Does that make sense, though? I mean, are anybody else doing anything to better leverage and take more opportunity to put themselves in a position to I guess, take more market share? Right now is a perfect example of how you can take more market share. And how are you able to do that? What are you willing to do differently? Not that you have to do more, you just have to do it differently.
I think moving forward, the agents that are the most comfortable, the most knowledgeable, and that are able to communicate
Yeah.
with everyone, like you said, even the person on the other side of the transaction, if you want to kill them, you still remain calm and help
Yeah.
them. I think those are the agents that are going to make it. We're going to see a huge exodus, I think, in the next 4 months of agents that are just, they can't do it because they're overwhelmed.
And if I get to it later on, I'll be able to, if I remember to, I'll be able to tell you that the ones that have been kind of doing everybody wrong, that same handful, man, they're going to be put in a really tough position.
It's going to bring them more to the forefront, and more people
Yeah.
are going to be able to see it. Whether you want to believe it or not, it's going to be in your face.
Before I forget, I'll just pull up. I'll just give you an example. Let's say somebody was taking 3.5% and giving you 2.5 or 2 or whatever they wanted to do before, because it was a norm to do half and half here. Now in Hattiesburg, it's 3.5, 2.5 is the norm. Mobile, it's 3.8, 2.2. But they understand the standard and they understand the norm. But if you go outside of that norm, it starts to build in resentment with the other agents, regardless of what that is. Right? So here it was 50-50, and you went outside of that, you got kind of blacklisted somehow, however you want to. But let's say somebody makes an offer. Let's say you have the listing. Somebody makes an offer. You don't disclose anything on what they're going to get paid. Doesn't matter. They put in 3%, and you tell your seller, hey, if you don't want to pay them 3%, you can counter back at 2.5 or 2 or whatever you want to do. They may be a little bit more difficult to deal with. Are they going to be more? Yeah, they're going to be more difficult to deal with. They've proven themselves over the last 5 years or 3 years or 10 years, right? So now you want to put that in their ear because now it actually plays a part in the conversation. Now let's say you're dealing with somebody like Heather Bradford. Told you I was picking in the back of the room. Wasn't paying attention, were you back there? Let's say that you've done everything great. She's done, fantastic, great reputation, everything else. And let's say she has 3%, and now you tell the seller, I think I would leave the 3% alone because you want Heather on your side talking to their buyer about trying to come back with another counter or accept it. Does that make sense? That's going to be really interesting how that plays out based on the compensation they put in the offer and who the individual is representing the buyer, especially when you're on the list side. Isn't that going to be interesting how that plays out? Now before, when that same individual put up less or maybe treated the deal differently or was hard to deal with, you just had to take it because it was locked into your commission and you just had to suck it up. You could maybe done more in the transaction than they did, but maybe now you have more control or more leverage. Just think that's really interesting how this is going to unfold.
Are you saying some paybacks are coming, Justin?
I'm saying, for individually me, yes, there will be. For sure. For sure. Yeah.
I got my blacklist.
Yeah. Huh?
Drink what you sell.
Fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and sometimes too, a lot of people don't realize too, they tattletale to MREC and MREC can't do anything about it.
Right.
But I just think that's funny. They just don't understand what MREC can do or can't do. But you just want to, vent maybe. So what are the two major changes after August 17th? There's really two major changes. Everything else is kind of just changes from these two.
Have a buyer agency.
Yeah?
And no disclosure of how much the commission is.
Yeah, so the first one is buyer agent compensation removed from MLS. So we can't disclose that in MLS. Huh?
It's still on Flex. Did y'all know that?
The compensation is?
Yes, sir.
On your phone.
On your phone.
Oh, on your phone, okay.
Oh, that's great.
Just let y'all know.
I don't know if anybody did this or not. Before August 1st, you could have downloaded all of the transactions, including the buyer's agent compensation, before August 1st.
I wanted to do that.
Now, it was a pain in the ass to do.
So are you going to share it?
Actually, what's interesting about it is you're better off if you don't know.
Yeah, no doubt.
So buyer's agent compensation removed from MLS. You can still market it outside of that. I don't recommend that. We'll get into that later on. But the second one is buyer agency agreement signed before touring a home with buyers. I think this one is actually going to change. I think it's really tough for buyers to show up to a property that they're wanting to see the house, especially the next 6 months or next year, depending on they're new to the game. They've bought a house before. They think they understand how the process works, and now all this has changed. Perfect example was you had a friend in another state called you and said, hey, I showed up to a house to look at the house, and they made me sign a form before I went in. Was this a thing now? Was this legal, or are they lying to me? And sure enough, it's a real thing, right? But she didn't know if she signed a non-exclusive or exclusive. Turns out she signed an exclusive and didn't know it. Didn't realize it. And what's happening in Colorado is that they're pushing back on this happening because the buyers are complaining that they were roped into an agreement that they weren't aware of. They weren't really made full, knowledgeable of what they're signing. Yeah, exactly, right?
Lord.
So I think eventually this will be changed before you sign a buyer's agreement, before you make the offer. That's my prediction, because that's a safer place to be. You can build into a relationship. You can still sign. You need to sign a working with a broker, all those kind of things, disclosing. But I don't think you'll probably be able to go into it probably, and it may be state specific too. But I think there's going to be some pushback on that, especially from consumers themselves, because there's going to be a lot of agents going to say, "Yep, you have to do this. It's our company policy for you to sign this before I show you the house." Are they going to read it? No. Especially when it's 4 pages long. Is it 4 or 6 or 2, whatever it is, 4? It's more than it needs to be. It's not 1 page. It's not a paragraph. Anybody read the Apple terms and conditions? Anybody read the Apple terms and conditions?
Find it.
Yeah, right? So nobody reads anything anymore, right? They just assume based on whoever told them that. And especially if it's an agent that they don't know, they're probably more at risk than they are assuming. And they're going to probably have more consumer associations that are going to be kind of lobbying for more change in the next several months, several years, whatever it's going to be. But I think that's really what's going to happen.
FaceTiming an out-of-state person, it's kind of hard to have this whole thing happen.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't even met you.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, too, brokerages that are virtual are probably going to have a little more difficulty articulating it and presenting value than a brick and mortar. Because some people want to meet you in an office. They want to see that you're legitimate. And because they're going to, I don't know if anybody realizes this, but MREC does the majority of their problems are from non-agent people acting as agents. And the people they're working with thinking they're licensed and they're not. I mean, that's rampant and people don't understand. It's just from a scam artist and everything else. So this is going to be a thing now. There's going to be so many different things that are going to unfold from this. So here's some of the minor changes. You can market a BA comp as buyer agent compensation. So you can market buyer agent compensation off MLS. I don't recommend it. We'll get into that later on. But concessions field is added to the MLS, wire in. Anybody put in a listing recently and saw the wire in? Yes or no, that the seller is open to concessions being paid by the seller?
Yeah, that's all right.
Now I will tell you, concessions does not mean buyer agent compensation. Two different things. Concessions is just like closing costs, appraisal, those kind of things, right? Roof repairs, those kind of things. Seller can set buyer agent comp to 0, which they really could before. That could be a penny. But did we really see that? No, because it was done a certain way, and now we're doing it a different way. And you'll see some listing agents, some companies, this List by Freedom, all this kind of stuff. Imagine List for Freedom saying, hey, we'll put it in MLS for $200. You don't have to pay a buyer's agent anything. It's up to them to do it. So they can sell their house for $200, and that's how they market it. That's the clickbait. See where that's going? Off the rails, right? And putting the seller in a bad position where they think the house is going to sell and nobody, who's going to do the work? The buyer's agent, and then the buyer's agent is going to be paid by the buyer to do the seller side too. And the seller may not have funds or may only want to pay you 2%, 2.5%. That can be problematic. Yeah. VA buyers can now pay buyer agent compensation. That also will be August 10th. That goes into effect. It's temporary for right now. You can't market your services for free. Some agents did that. You can market your services for free now, but on the buyer's agency agreement, it has to state that it's 0. You're actually working for free, and the seller doesn't pay you anything either.
Wow, who wants that job?
Right? You're just doing it for love and affection.
Yes, it's to help everybody.
Open houses don't require a buyer agent agreement if you're the listing agent. If you're doing an open house for another agent, that's where it gets real weird. Now, if it's for your own brokerage, technically you can still do it on the west side, technically, and that's still kind of shaking out to a little gray. But if you're doing it for another brokerage, you're definitely going to have buyer agent agreements at an open house. Showings on your listings don't either as far as a buyer agent agreement. A lot of people don't realize that, but that's a service that you're providing for the seller to show their own property under your own listing services. And then the buyer agent compensation isn't part of the seller paid concessions for loans.
Wait, so if we're showing our own listing, we don't have to have a buyer's agency agreement?
As long as you're treating them as a customer. As long as you're treating them as a customer. And you'll probably need to do a work with a broker, do a customer, and that's really it. But that's ultimately, from that point on, they've got to be a customer. And if the things change, then you need a buyer agent agreement, yeah. Especially if you go to a different property, right? If they don't like your property, now it needs to change. But the buyer agent compensation isn't part of the seller paid concessions for loans. We'll get into it right now. Seller paid concessions on conventional loans. So seller concession limits for conventional loans typically range from 3 to 6% of the home's purchase price. However, the limit varies based on factors such as the buyer's down payment and the loan to value ratio. So 6% is what the seller can pay. Is that what? And you can have the buyer's agent compensation as part of that, but does the buyer need those concessions to close a loan too, for whatever closing costs or whatever they need to have? I mean, I don't think it really matters, because if they have cash to pay, if they have, let's say, $5,000 to pay, it doesn't matter if they pay $5,000 towards concessions or $5,000 toward your compensation. It's still, they only have X amount of money to work with. Now, in the future, I think that there will be, and NAR is working on this as far as getting Fannie and Freddie to factor in the buyer's agent compensation and be financed on top of concessions on top of the loan. But now we're looking at a 103% loan, 105%. Do you remember those days? Who remembers those days, 105% loans? I've gotten a 105% loan before, where you get money back at closing. Those were fun. Yeah, and you didn't have to have a job. You just had to tell them you made money. That was it. I was like, you sure? Okay, here you go. But also interest rates were 8 or 9%. So FHA loans. The Federal Housing Administration allows seller concessions up to 6% of the home's purchase price or the appraised value, whichever is lower. So you can put your buyer's agent compensation within that 6%. Just you got to keep an understanding that they may need the 6% towards seller, closing costs and whatever else they need to close out the loan. Does that make sense? But you go outside of that, good luck. So they either have to finance it with your brokerage or yourself, or I don't know, come and paint your cabinets at your house. I don't know what is going to happen. It's going to happen. I think it may be a barter system at some point, depending on what they do on the side. Mow your yard for the next 6 months. Actually, I had that happen. where I sold the house, I sold an investment property for our next door neighbor, and they had a lawn care business. And I said, I don't have to charge you anything. You just mow my yard for the next 2 years. And he goes, deal. And I was like, sweet. I was like, all right. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm done. Department of Veteran Affairs for VA loans typically allows seller concessions up to 4% of the home purchase price. And the VA loan now has a temporary policy allowing veterans to pay the buyer agent compensation when purchasing a home, where they couldn't allow it before. It was banned, right? So that goes into effect August 10th in a few days. It may be after that, I'm not sure, but that's where it's set to be right now.
Do you
Anyway,
know if that's gonna be, is it gonna be part of, or based on the appraisal amount, or is that gonna be outside of the appraisal? Well, that's a question we had, at one of our meetings, we were discussing that.
It's gonna be based on the contract price.
Well, what I'm saying is.
there's the key word, assume.
Well, that, yeah, I mean, if it's,
Never seen
if it appraises at, 210.
I don't think you can't, because unless they paid a difference, remember? Because when you sign the FHA VA disclosure, saying that basically if it doesn't appraise, they have the ability to back out,
Yeah.
or they have the ability to move forward and pay the difference, but the loan is only going to be on this amount. Yeah. All right, so let's look at these changes from the perspective of the listing agent. Before we do, anybody have any questions, comments up until what we got now? Anybody see anything different, have a different mindset, different? I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying, here's what I am saying. I'm providing this information from an eAgent point of view, but from eAgent Nexus owner. A couple of things are probably going to happen. One is if you want to do dual agency as an agent in eAgent Nexus, we're going to have the broker approve it before that happens, because that's additional liability that's going to even be more apparent moving forward. That's the next, after the buyer's side lawsuit, dual agency is the next one to follow on the chopping block. And then another one is when it comes to the listing agreements, I think when you are, even if you know the compensation the seller is willing to pay to a buyer's agent, you shouldn't really disclose it. You're putting yourself and your brokerage in a position of liability, and there's really no need to. They're going to make an offer on it anyway. If the house is $200,000 and that's what they're asking, well, the seller's also asking, hey, we'll pay you 2%. Does it mean that it's negotiable? Yeah, everything's negotiable. The only thing that wasn't negotiable was the price that you were getting paid before, which I see is a huge benefit. You're now in control. That makes a big difference for the ones that can add value, right? So I don't know how many times we'd show 6 properties. I know which ones they're going to pick. It's the one with 2%. Every time, right? It's not the one at 3%. You can have 6 of them at 3%, one at 2%. For some reason, that's the one they want to go with. Just Murphy's Law, right? Well, now you don't have to deal with that. Not that you had to deal with it before. You could ask them, but it wasn't customary. It wasn't forced upon them, right? So this whole thing is going to, if you look at it this way, it's real wide right now what you think you can do, can't do, what you should and shouldn't do, and what your broker allows you to do. But over a period of time, this thing will become less and less frictionless, and it will get down to be skinnier and skinnier as people move forward and go, this is the new norm, whatever that is, until the next lawsuit. Then we'll get a different new norm. Then we'll go wide again and then come back narrow over the next 6 months, 18 months, however long it takes.
So in your office, are you going to allow like a listing agent that negotiates a 6% commission with the seller, act as a customer?
Yeah. Customer, yeah. I think the idea is when you're asking about the buyer's agent compensation, you're asking about your own. If you bring it as a dual agent or them as a customer. That's really what you should know, because you need to know about for your own self. Anything outside of that, it really doesn't matter.
Similar to what she's been saying, so I'm a little confused on if we do continue what we've been doing, let's say we negotiate 6%, then it's up to the broker or the agent to decide how much they pay the buyer's broker.
It's not up to them unless you're using a specific form that gives your brokers the ability to pay.
I mean, right now, the contract actually has that in there.
Yeah.
It gives you a choice whether the seller pays it.
Well, the contract does, but it's only in the contract based on what listing agreement you have in place. Now, that's another thing that I was going to say for eAgent Nexus. Right now, I would say probably in the next 30, 60 days, we'll have a new policies and procedures, and one of those policies will be that you will not negotiate for a buyer's agent compensation or disclose it for eAgent Nexus, because it just creates more liability, and it doesn't do any good. If you know it, great. If you don't know it, doesn't matter anyway. It really doesn't matter. It's just that it was the norm before. That makes sense?
So
Anybody was an agent in the 80s? Want to call anybody out? Richard, yours was in the 80s. Yeah. You know, in mid 90s, that's when kind of the buyer agency came about. And really, when you think about it, it came from MLS being online. Anybody who was an agent or was an investor or bought a home when there were MLS books? I did as an investor as a books, and I was like, man, this is. And I would go to an older broker and they say, hey, can you give me the old books that are not relevant anymore so I can get comp? That were like months old, and I would even know what properties were for sale. Isn't that crazy?
Book, little black and white.
Yeah, black and white photos. Yeah.
But I started off as a buyer's agent when, when MLS showed up in books and people were, the internet was a fad,
This is the legend, Judy Atherton, by the way, an icon in the industry that stays under the radar most of the time.
Since I started as a buyer's agent, I shouldn't say never, I rarely ever showed a house that I didn't have a buyer agency agreement in place. People come to the office, I
Yeah.
go through the working with the broker, it leads beautifully right into the buyer agency agreement. It's just that now our buyer agency agreement is going to look different because that old buyer agency agreement instructed us to get the money, get our fee from the listing agent.
Yeah.
And now, where the Department of Justice is heading, they don't want broker-to-broker payment. Like,
Yeah.
I negotiate 6% and I offer you half of my 6%. They don't want that.
Yeah.
So I negotiate my listing fee, and then I tell the seller, maybe, let's plan on offering 3%. But if you get a sloppy offer and we have to pick up the slack, when we get that offer, there's no proof of funds, no mortgage letter, it's got some weird phrase and who knows what it means, I mean, you've all seen it. So, maybe we negotiate that buyer agent fee.
Yeah.
Because now we, as buyer's agents, are going to have to up our game.
Yeah.
That I personally think the days of meeting somebody at a house and trying to build a relationship at the front porch of a house that's not your listing even they're thankfully going to be gone.
Yeah.
It's safer just to meet people at your office or a closing attorney's office, a restaurant, the library, wherever. It's safer to meet them,
Yeah.
do your presentation, tell them what you're going to do. And if they won't sign the working with the broker, you shouldn't be showing them anyway.
Yeah. There's a lot of safety issues that come up that actually makes this a benefit as well. I think there's a lot of changes, but I think the majority of them are really when I got down to it, I couldn't really find a negative for the changes that are happening. The only negative was that there are changes and we need to learn, and now you're spending time in a classroom trying to figure this part out and what to do and articulate this. That was really the only negative. I couldn't find one. I really couldn't find one.
Well, the negative is we're uncomfortable with it because.
Yeah, like what Simon Sinek said, right? I mean, you're outside of your comfort zone and you don't know what to say just yet. And has anybody had their first conversation with buyer agent agreement? A few? It was kind of clunky?
Luckily, I'm working with people that I know, so it's okay.
Yeah, or it's, sometimes like you work with an investor, like they're more about the numbers than it is about whatever else, and they're comfortable with you and they just move forward, right? And the majority of the time it's going to happen like that. But then you'll have some that think they know more than they do, and sometimes you just have to, play through that and hopefully come out the other side with a good relationship. But anytime that I've seen more sticklers, if it's a seller or buyer super stickler on everything, I just want to pull back and go, I don't think I'm the agent for you, because this is going to go off the rails at some point, I know, and this is only going to end in me getting paid something, probably less, to get the deal done, and a bad review on top of that. That's where it's headed. So I'm just like, find somebody else, Maybe they'll tell you the same thing and you'll learn from them. I have never found somebody that is hard to deal with in the beginning and it smooths out down the line. Never happens. They show they're crazy really early. And believe it. Whatever they're telling you, believe it. That's what's going to come true. So let's get to kind of a timeline here. So the old way of doing things, if you're the listing agent, think about listing agent. You're on the listing side. Put that hat on. So it started with the listing consultation, if you actually did one. You negotiated the compensation for the buyer and seller side, right? You put that buyer's agent compensation in MLS. You did your marketing, whatever needs to happen there. You had some showings. You got some offers. You finally got one under contract. You went through the contingencies, and you went to closing. That was the old way. Everybody was on the same page, same rules, same everything. Everybody was used to it, and they knew what to expect. I think that was one of the fear things now. You don't know what to expect. The expectations are kind of all over the place. So the new way from the settlement is you still do a listing consultation. You negotiate compensation. Could be, as far as the settlement goes and what they allow for this state, you can negotiate both sides. I don't recommend both sides. But you can't put the buyer's agent compensation in MLS. You can still do marketing, just like you normally would of the property, and you can still market what that buyer's agent compensation is. You still do showings. The buyer agent compensation could be on the key at the showing. That's when they find out about it. Who knows? Do you want him to even know about it? I don't think so. You get an offer, and in the offer, that's where you're going to negotiate the buyer's agent compensation. So traditionally, for the buyer's agent compensation, with you being the listing agent, it was negotiated here. Now it's negotiated here. That's really the biggest part. They're part of the conversation further down the line. We're just moving that piece down the line. And then you got it under contract and you went to close. Here's the DOJ way. You do a listing consultation, you negotiate the listing agent compensation. Don't talk about the buyer's agent compensation. Because if you don't know about it, then you can't disclose it. If your listing agreement doesn't have buyer agent compensation for the other side on it, how do you know to disclose it? So then they can't get you for disclosing unless you had a conversation about it and did it outside of what the seller was requesting. You can't do the marketing, as far as disclosing the buyer agent compensation, and you can't put it in MLS. You got some showings, everything's negotiated down here. You put it under contract and you go to close. Does that make sense? That's essentially where we are. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I get it. So you're saying that the DOJ is only going to, they don't want us, like, say Judy calls me, she wants to show my listing, and she asks immediately, what's the buyer agent compensation? And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I can't tell you that.
Well, no, you say, I don't know.
Okay.
Or
Well,
my
I
perfect.
don't know what's there. What if they're
Well-
like, well, I'm not going to show the house.
Yeah, no, the idea is, here's the problem. Here's the problem, is that if everybody's on the same page, thinking that the listing agent has all the information and all your job is to do is to squeeze it out of them, then we're on the wrong page. The right page is the listing agent doesn't know and doesn't care.
So we don't know.
It doesn't matter.
if we can Include that in our listing.
No, and really think about it. This is what really not bothers me, but it benefits you. Any agents that there's a specific set of agents that do 5% listings. Like that's their MO, right? That's what they are. That's what they're doing. And the reason for it is they've been having compensation compression over the last several years. And if they're going into a listing agreement, they'll say, look, hey, in order to get the listing, I'm going to get it at 5, it'll be 2.5 and 2.5. Everything's fine. Now everybody is going to be happy moving forward. Now, is it much easier for that same listing agent to go in and get a 3% listing and tell the seller that we're going to negotiate that down the line based on the offer? We'll see what it offers. If I'm the seller, truthfully, and you're listing my property, and I'm going to commit to a buyer's agent compensation before the buyer's agent submits an offer, and I don't even know what the offer is.
Yeah.
Does it really benefit me? No, it doesn't. It's a negative.
I think, is it?
What I would tell you if you called on my listing is my seller is willing to negotiate that.
Yeah.
Please show my listing.
That was my question. So
Well, no,
it's
my thing is too, and I've got it
My
in.
seller is open to negotiation. You just can't say,
well,
oh yeah, it's 2% or 3%.
I would kind of look at it this way. I wouldn't say open negotiation. I would just say the seller's looking we're open to looking at all and any offers. Put it in the offer. That's it. We're open. That's it.
Responsibility to our sellers.
Yeah,
So if our sellers come and say, yeah, I'll pay 3%, but the buyer's agent is really only asking for 2%. If we go tell them that they'll pay 3%, we didn't do our seller a favor.
correct. It's exactly the same reason why when you say, okay, let's say that the house has got a bad roof. You know it's going to be need replaced, especially with loans now. They're going to request that the property be, have a new roof on it. So you know it's going to need that. You talk to the seller ahead of time, and you get them to expect that that's going to be an expense negotiated down the line. But you don't want to put it in writing to where, hey, it's going to be a $12,000 roof. And then you put it in MLS. Hey, it's a $12,000 roof. The seller's already willing to put it on for you. But now let's say, and that's great for 95% of people, but let's say you have a buyer that is a roof contractor. Ooh, I just got 12 grand off. It's only going to cost me 5.5. That's doing your seller a disjustice because you don't know who the buyer is or what they're able to offer. It's the same way for the buyer agent compensation. You're putting yourself in a position where it doesn't benefit the seller, and it also puts you in a position of liability. Does this make sense?
The incentives, like if the seller wants to promote an incentive.
I would, truthfully, I think it depends on the market. If you're in a seller's market, you definitely don't want to say anything. If you're in a super buyer's market and you got 12 houses for every buyer that's out there looking, I think the whole thing is going to change. There's going to be flags out there and the guy will doing like this. 3% paid to buyer's agent. Concessions. We'll put in, leave the dog. Pizza for a year. All that kind of stuff. You're going to see all kind of crazy.
Mow your grass.
Yeah, exactly. You see what I'm saying? So you're going to have the Jiffy Lube guy out front and he's going to be saying all kind of stuff. Right? So it depends on the market. So this.
Got you on camera, you know that, right?
Have you seen me on the dance floor? It's the Jiffy Lube guy. No, I'm just joking. So the DOJ, right, wants it to be done this way, but essentially you're starting to see in a lot of the large brokerages across the country, EXP, Real, and some other ones that are really kind of forcing this into place too, because this is what the change is happening anyway. So you might as well skate to where the puck is. Right? Instead of changing once and changing it again, you might as well just go here anyway. Yeah, this doesn't benefit you at all. It makes no sense. See what I'm saying?
Question I have, one of the biggest things that I took from the whole Gerald Meyer, Mayor, whatever.
Gerard.
Yeah, Gerard, whoever.
As soon as he said Gerald, I was like, man, he just opened the can of worms.
Yeah, he would cuss me out for that. Anyway, he said that we cannot tell our sellers that if they're not open to offering a buyer's agency commission, that their house is not gonna sell. He
Correct.
said, if we say that, then
Correct.
we're steering.
Yeah, because you're
Explain
steering the
that to
seller.
me. We are working for the sellers. We have a fiduciary duty to that seller
Yes.
to tell them this is what is gonna happen or could happen. How are we steering in that? I mean, how
So
is
say it
that?
again from the beginning.
It's all in the presentation.
So if we're speaking to our sellers and we explain to them, if you're not open to offering a buyer's agent's,
If you're not open
if
to
you're
it,
not
yeah.
open to offering a buyer's agent's commission,
Yeah.
your house may sit on the market longer.
Yeah. Now, that was initially the issue when everybody started trying to figure this piece out. Right? But when you really look at the DOJ way, you shouldn't have been talking about it anyway. It doesn't matter. If you never talk to the seller about what they're offering to the buyer's side of a specific number, then it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. This is so clean. It benefits the buyer, it benefits you, it benefits the seller, it benefits all parties. Yeah, Yari?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't you as a listing agent, you do your presentation for you to sell the house?
Yes.
For the seller?
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about what the buyer's agent is
Yep.
gonna sit in the market longer, because I have to do my job and I'm gonna show you as a listing agent that I can do my job.
Yeah, so,
That-
yeah,
that-
no,
that's
so
how
the
it should be.
angle, the reason why they said the angle is they were thinking that the listing agent was going to say, look, the buyer's agent saw something on TV. I mean, the seller saw something on TV saying they don't have to pay the buyer's agent. And you don't. You never had to. And if we tell them that it'll sit on the market longer, then we're doing them a disjustice because we don't know. We have no idea. And if you don't, the only thing you need to do is build an expectation and say, when you get an offer, there's going to be a buyer's agent compensation, most likely in the offer, and based on the offer, you either pay it or we counter.
And it's all negotiable.
That's it. Everything is negotiable all the time. The only thing that wasn't negotiable here was this side for you. When it was negotiated, somebody went and got 4%, gave you 2, and good luck to you, and that's what it was about. Yeah.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what you already said, I agree. Like, I think the mindset needs to just shift a little bit to, you know, you need to understand, like, I'm not working for me and the other agent, right? I'm just, you know, this is my fee, yeah, and whatever happens after that, once we get to that point, then we'll cross that bridge.
Ever heard the expression, stay in your lane? Just stay in your lane. Stay in your lane, right? Just worry about you. Don't put your nose in the buyer's agent compensation business. They'll work themselves out over there. Does this make sense? If you're the listing agent, this was the process. This was the timeline. So let's look at it from the buyer's agent point of view. So switch hats. Now you're representing the buyer. So you did a buyer consult. I know everybody did buyer consultations and had buyer agent compensation, or the agreement signed. I think there's probably only a handful of people that did that. I'm gonna tell you my personal experience when I got licensed in 2002. I did it for the first 3 or 4 as far as a buyer agent compensation agreement. Got them signed. Everything's going perfect until I realized that the one I just signed, after a week later, I found out that accidentally that he was a convicted sex offender. And then some of the properties we were looking at were not in good areas for the buyer. So I've been a little skittish since then. So I thought it was interesting. I talked to my broker at the time and I said, this is really what's happening. And at the time, the buyer agent compensation or buyer agent agreements were really more, you were exclusive to them more so than it is now them being exclusive to you and vice versa. It was a little more, you were tied to them at the hip and you were their fiduciary, and from that point on until the end of the contract. And I think I signed it for like a year. I was like, okay. So I finally talked to my broker at the time and she says, I have no idea what to do. This has never come up. So I talked to her and I said, what do you think? Do you think Cynthia Joachim would know something about this? And she goes, give her a call and find out. I talked to Cynthia and she goes, this is so funny because I remember like it was yesterday. It was 20 years ago. She said, I tell her and she goes, huh. And then silence. And I was like, and? Like, what? What's going on? And she goes, I'll call you tomorrow. I'll find out something. I don't know. We'll figure something out, but I'll call you tomorrow. I'm waiting on pins and needles, all morning. Comes the afternoon. There wasn't any text. I call her, no answer. I'm like, starting to be in the evening, don't get anything. Finally, she calls me. She goes, I got an idea. I said, okay, tell me, what do I need to do? She goes, I think you need to be a bad agent. And I was like, what? What do you mean? She goes, when they call, you're always out of town. You can't get to them real quick. The next time you talk to them, like, hey, I don't think this is going to work out. I don't think it's going to be a really good, you think you're probably better off going with somebody else, whatever. And then that's what I did. Fast forward another week or two, I'm at an investor association meeting, which they're being held here on the first Tuesday every month. But at the time, they were at our brokerage at the time. Not my brokerage, but the brokerage I was with at the time. You may have been there. And I tell the guy, like, hey, same thing. He goes, no problem, man. Don't worry about it. We'll cancel it. No problem. He says, I'm just busy with other things. So by the end of the meeting, a new agent comes up to me and says, man, these things are amazing. The first time I've been here, I got a new client. Same guy. I was like, do not sign a buyer's agent agreement, with this guy. And she goes, really? And I was like, why? And I'm telling her, and she goes, oh, okay. And I was like, then I haven't seen her from that point on, from any investor meetings. I was like, okay, maybe that was the wrong idea of what she got. But does that make sense? So that was my own take. I had used those agreements up until that point, and then had a bad experience, and then like, maybe this is not a good idea. And then did my own. What time are we getting it? What time is it? Oh my God! All right. All right. The new way on the buyer agent consultation, you do it here. You're now putting in. You get the agreement signed before you show a house. One of the big things is that whatever the agreement is, if you sign it up for 3%, you sign it for 3%, and you go to put in an offer, it's got to be 3%, whatever the buyer's agent agreement states. It can't be more than that. You do showings. Here's what's going to be interesting. You're going to show up to a house, and on the key ring, on the counter, or wherever, somewhere, it's just going to show up. It'll say 3-agent buyer's agent compensation. Could be on the sign, could be whatever. Because the listing agent doesn't understand what liability is just yet. So that they're not part of the new norm yet. So you'll see that. You may have to articulate to your buyer what that means. Who knows what that means? Because it could say 2%. Now you got to have this awkward conversation, which you didn't have to have before. But you're going to write the offer at 3% anyway. So it doesn't matter what it says on the counter or whatever else. You're going to put it in the offer however you need it to. You're going to go into contract and you're going to put it to close. The DOJ way is that you do a buyer agent consultation. Yeah. These two are the same. Forgot what I was going to say. There's showings with the buyer's agreement. I think I was supposed to mark something out. I may have messed up my chart. Y'all come up here. The showing of the buyer agent. You do showings. Oh, and two. Yeah, this is what I was going to say. Is that you don't go find out what what the compensation is before you do showings or at the showings. Just leave all that alone, because let's say if you're there showing, right, and you're 3% buyer's agent agreement, and they say 2%, now they're expecting you to put in an offer at 2%. I told you we're only doing 2%. But if you don't know, you can play dumb and just go, hey, I'm asking for 3%. It doesn't matter what it is.
So the best thing is just to forget that whole conversation.
Yes.
And put it in the offer.
Not even make the conversation. Don't do the conversation. Don't ask. Don't look. Don't tell. Don't disclose. Does that make sense? It's just it's another. You're putting a barrier in front of yourself.
3% on the contract, that is asking strictly the listed, the selling person. Right? Or no?
No.
So then that's when you have to get the rest from your buyer.
Yeah.
You see what I'm asking?
Here's what's really interesting. In the contract, here's something that's really confusing. I will say this. So if you have a buyer's agent agreement for 3%, okay, and for some reason the listing agent did the listing agreement in a way where they're going to be sharing it from their brokerage, but you don't know this, and you're not asking about it. Every time I make an offer, I'm going to say on the contract, because it states, and we'll get into it in a second, that it'll state who's paying for the buyer agent compensation. Is it the buyer, is it the seller, or is it the listing brokerage, right? And the reason why it says the listing brokerage is because the listing brokerage could be doing a shared. They shouldn't be, but they could be. But you don't know this, and you're not asking. So always put in the offer that the seller's paying it, and let them deal with it on their side. You don't have to ask. Doesn't matter who's paying.
Are the lenders going to have a problem with that?
No.
So,
That's why we have a lender in the audience and an attorney.
It's semantics at this point.
Yes, it really doesn't matter. So say it's semantics. It doesn't matter. Let them figure that out on their end, however they want to do it on their end, just like they're going to tell you, figure it out on your end.
So then they can come back and counter.
They can come back in and counter and say, hey, just making sure, I wanted to let you know that the listing brokerage is going to be paying this, not the seller. That's fine. I didn't know that, but I didn't need to know it.
Right.
Just put in the offer, but the seller's paying it. Because probably 95% of the time, that's going to be done that way anyway. Anybody have any questions?
So you need that verbiage, because I got one offer that said brokerage to brokerage. Like the listing.
Yeah, yeah.
So it needs.
And we'll go through that in a second.
Okay, sorry, I'm jumping in.
All right, let's look at the benefits post August 17th real quick. The buyer's agent have full control over their compensation. You didn't have that before. Now you have full control. Number 2 is the listing agents don't have to negotiate the buyer agent compensation. Just like I was saying before, instead of going for a 5% listing, now you can go for a 3% listing and get paid more. And it's easier to get a 3% than a 5%. It's easier to get a 3.5% than it is a 5%. Right? Number 3, listing agreements have a better chance of getting paid on both. Listing agents have a better chance of getting paid on both sides of the listing. Right? Because in the future, more buyers are going to be calling on the sign because they may not have the right understanding that the buyer agent will still get paid, but on the seller side. But they may see advertised and say, hey, contact me. You don't have to pay anything here, which they may not have because the seller's paying everything on their side just to do the listing side. So the listing agent will have more control when it comes to that. We'll play that out next week. Yard signs give you more of an ability to capture qualified buyer leads. The reason why you didn't do a lot of marketing before, because the majority of the time the property was going to be sold with a buyer's agent. It wasn't really going to be done through you. But I think in the future, more listings will be sold, or the listing, will be represented by either both as a dual or the buyer being a customer and the buyer not have to pay anything. Because it's already negotiated on the front end when you did the listing consultation. You say, hey, it's 3% for me to represent on your list side. If I'm also responsible, not representing, responsible for dealing with the buyer's minutia and getting them through the process, I'm getting another 2%, 3%, whatever it is. Make sense? Number 5, less genie agents. In the industry means more clients, you're gonna pick you. And the reason why I say genie agents, they're like the garage door opener genie. That's what they're basically doing, the door openers, glorified door openers. That's really what they did. Mass majority of the time, you get a lead in, Zillow, whatever else, go show the house and move on, and that's really not a lot of value. Now we're gonna have to have a lot more value, especially when the clients are picking you for a reason. Home builders will become easier to work with for buyers and their agents. Man, I tell you that there's gonna be one winner in all this, it's gonna be the builders.
Yep. All day long.
Listing and buyer agents will be paid more for being an expert in a niche. Because think about it, if you're expert in waterfront or land, and there's a buyer looking for waterfront or land, and all your marketing says you're an expert in land, they're going to pick you, especially when they realize that they may be paying you. Buyer's agents will be more protected when working with exclusive buyers. Because now the buyers feel like they're exclusive to you, and there's more of a relationship where they're connected to you, not just working with a broker and we'll see how this works out, and a week later they ghost you and we don't know what happened. Did anybody y'all have any comments or anything? All right. Agents now have the leverage to market themselves as buyer agents. Isn't that interesting? Because you're marketing yourself right now as just real estate agents, but you could be a specific buyer's agent and have certain marketing for buyer's agents, because now buyer's agents are looking for you as a buyer's agent, where they didn't before. They looked for homes. And number 10, 5-star reviews matter now more than ever, especially for buyers. If you don't have any 5-star reviews, I would go back to all your clients and get as many of those as possible. And the reason is it's going to be harder to get 5-star reviews from buyers that paid you $10,000 or perceived that they paid $10,000 in the price for your service, but the value was down here and you just phoned it in. Think it's going to get a 5-star review? Not when they think they paid you $10,000. Now when they didn't perceive they paid you $10,000 and they thought it was free or the seller paid it, whatever, you didn't even have the conversation. It was really easy to do it because the perceived value was easier. It was a higher bar. Now the bar is a lot harder to meet. Make sense? I'm not trying to scare everybody. Just saying.
Really hard. A lot of people try to pay me that I don't know. No, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just have to sell.
And that's that you couldn't do that, but
Right.
that's the idea.
Now I'll say sure.
Exactly. So the last 12 months, buyer's compensation. This is what I pulled the last 12 months. You had, and this is on the left side here, this is 8,000 transactions. This is the amount of transactions, and this is the percentage of buyer's agent comp in the MLS as it was listed. So less than 2%, 2% or less was in that, I think around 700, 800 transactions. Vast majority, like 75, 7,700, was 2.5. A little small bit was 2.75. Another majority, about half, was 3%, and then a little bit 3.5 and 4. And normally this is going to be the builders, right, or motivated sellers or something like that, trying to maybe offer something unique. Here's what's interesting about this statistic. In 2019, I did this 5 years ago, and there was really only, so like these two are in here now, it's about 50-50. In 2019, this was 75%, this was 25%. It's actually 24%. So in 5 years, this has doubled. And I think the reason for it is that this was locked in. It was easier now. You saw compression on compensation from the listing side, and the listing agent would go and say, hey, well, what if we do this? How can we negotiate this down? I don't know if I can pay you 6. And immediately they went to, hey, I'll do it for 5%. But now they don't have to. They can keep it at 3. What I think is really kind of funny about this, I think over a period of time, agents will get paid more, and the prices of the homes will sell for more. Because when the buyer's agent makes an offer and they put in 3%, they're going to make a higher offer to make sure that 3% is covered. So general housing prices will be higher. Offers will be higher. Even though the whole thing was about lowering housing prices, right? But you see how this is going to play out? Yeah, because before it was locked in, now it's part of the negotiation.
Well, I don't think our commission had anything to do. That's supply and demand is what kept housing prices up, not
True.
our commission.
And they thought like,
A ridiculous.
they thought, yeah, if it's going to pay, if the compensation to the agent was going to be less, the seller would just accept less. No, they're just going to want to accept the highest amount, period. That's what I would do. I'm asking for the max regardless of what I'm paying in. It's basically comes down to they weren't a practicing agent and understand the trenches of what actually happens. Does this make sense? All right, next week we're going to go through specific scenarios and specific language dealing with different topics that we're going to go through. Basically, this is more of an overview. We're going to get into the forms right now. We'll do like a 5-minute break. Make sure, yep. And the man, the myth, the bearded legend will be up here. Right? So 5-minute break, 10-minute break.